Iran is alone, but it wasn't meant to be like this. Iran has spent the last couple of decades building alliances with proxies and some of the world's strongest anti-West nations, but none of them are coming to its aid. Iran's allies have vanished. Even Hezbollah and Hamas have abandoned the Ayatollah. This is the true reason why everybody has turned their back on Iran. We'll start with the heavy hitters, China and Russia. Writing on June 24th for Bloomberg, Dina Esfandiari notes that Iran spent the last couple of decades building an extensive network of partners in the Middle East as well as beyond. This web of partnerships has expanded in recent times, where it once included any militant group or regime sympathetic to Iran's cause, such as Syria and the previously mentioned Hezbollah and Hamas. Iran's network expanded to include Russia and China. As Esfandiari puts it, Iran has been building ties elsewhere. It has shifted closer to Russia and China, and mended relations with its Gulf Arab rivals for regional power, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. All were meant to make up Iran's axis of resistance, the writer says. All seem to have now turned their collective backs on Iran. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. When Iran felt the true pressure of being isolated by the West in the 2010s due to powerful sanctions, it turned to both Russia and China for support. It succeeded in building closer ties with both, particularly Russia. When Russian President Vladimir Putin chose to invade Ukraine, Iran was one of the first countries that was happy to provide him with the weapons he needed to sustain his war. Drones were Iran's key form of support. According to Reuters, in September 2024, Russia launched at least 8,060 Iran-developed Shahid drones at Ukraine. Russia also has the ability to build its own version of the Shahid, based on Iranian components and documentation that it's using to batter Ukraine daily. That's how the partnership was meant to work. Iran or Russia gets into a bind and one helps out the other. As for China, it presented itself as an ally to Iran under the context of China presenting itself as a defender of countries such as Iran that are in conflict with the other superpower, Esfandiari writes. And these partnerships have extended to trade. China purchases a lot of its oil from Iran. Fortune says that China currently buys around 90% of the oil Iran exports, making the Middle Eastern country dependent on its Chinese ally for economic survival. There's also the BRICS alliance to consider. Iran, along with Russia, China, and 8 other nations, are members of this loose economic alliance. BRICS isn't a military alliance. Per its webpage, BRICS objectives include strengthening economic, political, and social cooperation among its members, as well as increasing the influence of global South countries in international governance. But the key word here is cooperation. Now that Iran is being hit hard by Israel and the US, it would expect Russia and China to come to its aid, not just due to the BRICS membership, but because Iran has spent the last few years being a weapons supplier for Russia and an oil source for China. And both have come to Iran's aid in a sense. As Le Monde notes, China was one of the first to strongly condemn the US strike against Iran, which saw it drop 14 of its GBU-57 bombs on Iran's key nuclear sites. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs even released a statement saying, China calls on the parties of the conflict, Israel in particular, to reach a ceasefire as soon as possible. Russia has delivered a similar condemnation. This reckless decision to launch missile and aerial strikes on the territory of a sovereign state, regardless of the justifications offered, constitutes a blatant violation of international law, Russia's foreign ministry said on June 22nd following the US strike on Iran. So there's condemnation aplenty. However, neither of these heavy hitters, upon whom Iran was relying to provide it with direct military aid in the event of fighting against the West, have done anything more. Why? When it comes to Russia, military aid of some description should be coming. Back in January, Iran and Russia signed the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, a treaty Iran ratified following Israel's launch of Operation Rising Lion. But therein lies a problem, as DW explains. Despite its ambitious name, the treaty falls short of establishing a mutual defense pact. It does not oblige either side to provide military assistance in the event of an attack. Instead, it simply commits both parties to refrain from aiding their adversaries. This isn't a cooperative defense pact. It doesn't leave Russia duty-bound to protect Iran, and Putin is taking advantage of that fact. Right now, it simply isn't advantageous for Russia to directly support Iran, which would leave it in a confrontation with the West. That's according to Middle East analyst Mariana Balankaya, who told DW, it has no need to, especially as it's trying to restore or improve relations with Washington, although some behind-the-scenes involvement can't be ruled out entirely. That's the problem for Iran if it's relying on Russia's help against the combined forces of Israel and the US. Russia doesn't see that fight as advantageous at a time when it's trying to build a diplomatic relationship with the US. Instead, Putin has offered to serve as a mediator in the conflict, a calming voice who, according to Belankaya, has already spent much of the last year trying to convince Khamenei to return to the negotiating table to talk about Iran's nuclear ambitions. But there's also another element to the lack of Russian support. Putin is still embroiled in his Ukraine campaign. His war has entered its 4th year and doesn't show any signs of ending. Through much of 2025, US President Donald Trump has been trying to pressure Putin into declaring a ceasefire, which Trump sees as the first step on the path to peace between Ukraine and Russia. Putin doesn't want that ceasefire, and now, with the US focusing on Iran, Putin is relishing the opportunity to continue his Ukraine invasion without worrying about the West. The US is distracted. That means Russia can launch more deadly attacks on Ukraine. As DW points out, June 17th saw Russia launch a deadly strike on Kyiv that killed 14 and injured dozens. That strike came just days after Israel launched Operation Rising Lion. The US, too focused on Iran, hasn't condemned Russia for killing innocent civilians. That's exactly how Putin wants it, which is perhaps the main reason why he isn't stepping up to help Iran. He's willing to allow his Middle Eastern ally to suffer because that suffering creates more opportunities for him to do what he wants in Ukraine without worrying about Western recrimination. But what about China? Why is this other supposed Iranian ally sitting on the sidelines in the emerging conflict? After all, as the United States Institute of Peace, or USIP, points out, China has some major energy and economic interests in Iran. Beyond the oil purchases we mentioned earlier, all 22 nations that make up the Arab League are also part of China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, which sees China invest heavily in developing countries. USIP also notes that Chinese trade with the combined Arab nations exceeded $400 billion in 2024 alone. A stable Middle East is good for China. That means Iran fighting a war against Israel and being bombed by the US is bad, yet China isn't directly intervening. And the reason may have been revealed years ago to Asia Times correspondent Lyle Goldstein. In a June 25th article for the outlet, he describes a visit he made to Shanghai several years ago. There, Goldstein met a leading Chinese strategist, who he quizzed on how China would view a war between Iran and the United States. Goldstein assumed the strategist would tell him how China would intervene due to such a war driving up oil prices and threatening Chinese interests in the Middle East. Instead, he shocked me by explaining that China would benefit from the US fighting yet another costly war in the Middle East, since that could mark the end of US global hegemony, Goldstein writes. The Chinese have always considered the Middle East as the graveyard of empires. Therein lies Iran's problem. Like Russia, China views what's happening in Iran right now as an opportunity. For Putin, the opportunity lies in distraction. The more the US, in particular, is focused on Iran, the less it's watching Russia as it continues its campaign in Ukraine. For Chinese President Xi Jinping, the conflict in Iran presents an opportunity for it to extend its influence deeper into the Middle East and Asia. As Goldstein notes, Chinese warships have conducted regular visits to the region for about 10 years. As recently as May, the Chinese Air Force went to Egypt to conduct a joint military exercise. What we see here is China doing what it's always done, focusing on diplomacy over direct action while also sending the not-so-subtle message that it could position itself as a defender and partner to other nations that may be worried about US aggression. While it could be argued that this position might crumble if China doesn't directly help Iran, Xi may see it another way. He may believe that China could use what's happening in Iran as an example he can deliver to other, smaller nations. Look what's happening to this major regional military power, China could say. Work with us, and we can protect you from the same fate. Opportunism lies at the heart of both Russia and China's refusal to come to Iran's aid. But what about the proxies? The network of militant groups and allied nations in the Middle East itself that Iran has spent so many decades building for such an occasion. Where are they in this fight, and why do they seem to have turned their collective backs on Iran in its time of need? The likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis have all been funded and trained by Iran for years. Hezbollah, which is based in Lebanon, was perhaps the biggest beneficiary of this Iranian help. As VisualPolitik EN says, there's Hezbollah, until recently considered the most powerful non-state military force in the world, a group responsible for some of the deadliest missile attacks against Israel in recent years. These are the groups that have happily fought against Israel in the past. In October 2023, it was Hamas that launched a devastating terrorist attack against Israel, killing 1,139 people, taking more than 200 hostages, and sparking a war that rages to this day. The Houthis in Yemen have also been active against Israel. The group's campaign of attacks on container shipping in the Red Sea was intended to deter Israel from continuing its fight against Hamas. That Red Sea campaign put the Houthis in US crosshairs multiple times, with devastating US-led airstrikes against the group taking place in both 2024 and 25, with the latter destroying much of the Houthi leadership. And therein lies the problem for Iran if it thought it could rely on its proxies to aid it in its new war with Israel and the US. Those proxies have spent the last few years being battered and turned into shells of their former selves. VisualPolitik points to these three groups, along with the Shia militia groups in Iraq, as Iran's key allies in the Middle East. All four have seen their ties to Iran grow significantly over the last few years, it says. They form what is informally known as the axis of resistance, but that axis is crumbling. VisualPolitik characterizes the relationship as some form of Middle Eastern octopus, with Iran serving as the head. The likes of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are the tentacles, allowing Iran to spread its influence throughout the Middle East. Those tentacles have been rendered almost obsolete. Well, Israel has been cutting off those tentacles one by one since the October 7th attacks, says VisualPolitik. And what we're witnessing now is the final phase, the strike against the head of the entire network. That's the point. Where Russia and China refuse to help Iran because they see opportunity in their supposed allies' strife, Iran's network of militant groups isn't helping because it has been beaten down to the point where it simply can't. And let's start with Hezbollah. There may be some resentment in that group, along with its military weakening to consider. In September 2024, Israel launched a terrifying attack on Hezbollah that saw it detonate the pages used by several of the group's key members. Those pages have been turned into makeshift bombs, and the effects were devastating. Among the Hezbollah dead was its leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Hezbollah may have blamed Iran for this incident, as several diplomats told the Wall Street Journal. Some members felt Iran had done little to protect the group, the diplomat said, according to the journal. Some Hezbollah figures blamed the intelligence failures, in part, on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. There's some element of tit for tat here. Hezbollah may be refusing to help Iran because of these perceived failures. However, if Israel is to be believed, the group may also be a shadow of its former self from a military standpoint. That's according to Bloomberg, which points out that Israel claims that it's taken out 70% of Hezbollah's missile and rocket arsenal since October 7, 2023. While those claims haven't been independently verified and can't be given Hezbollah's nature as a militant group, what we may be seeing here is the slicing of the tentacle that VisualPolitik talks about. Without so many of its missiles and rockets, Hezbollah needs to be far choosier about who its targets are. Combine that with war fatigue and the previously mentioned resentment, and you get a group that may see helping Iran now as a step too far. After all, Hezbollah could argue that it's done its part. It spent the last few years fighting Israel as one of Iran's proxies. Now that fight has arrived in Iran itself, Hezbollah may see this as an opportunity to step back, recover, and let Iran deal with the problem. Then there's Hamas. The group, which is primarily based in Gaza, has been something of a figurehead of Iran's fight against Israel before the conflict between the two nations became as direct as we see today. It was Hamas who launched the October 7, 2023 strikes, and it's Hamas and Palestinian civilians that have borne the brunt of Israel's response in the nearly 2 years since. And therein lies the problem for Iran if it tries to call on the group now that it's fighting Israel in the US. Hamas is a shell of its former self. Israel claims that it's already taken out a huge portion of the military group. According to ACLED, Israel claimed it had killed 17,000 of the between 25 and 30,000 fighters Hamas was believed to have had by October 2024. Those claims were disputed by ACLED, which notes that the detailed reports suggest that there were 8,500 militant fatalities up to that point. A few months later, the BBC reported that Israel were claiming to have killed 10,000 Hamas fighters. Whatever the case may be, that's anywhere between a third and a half of Hamas that's been destroyed by Israel. Another tentacle has been sliced. According to VisualPolitik, Hamas, and likely Iran, believed that it could unite the anti-Israel axis into a massive joint attack on Israel with the October 2023 attack. That didn't happen, at least not in the way that either would have liked. While Hezbollah and the Houthis joined the fight, neither proved especially effective in fighting against Israel. Outside of the missile and rocket strikes that prompted retaliation and the Red Sea campaign we mentioned earlier, neither was able to weaken Israel to any significant degree. For Hezbollah, the cost may have been up to 70% of its arsenal. Hamas, left somewhat stranded following October 2023, has lost far more. Beyond losing so much of its fighting force, VisualPolitik says that Hamas is believed to have only between 10 and 15% of the 20,000-strong stockpile of rockets and missiles it had before it launched its attack on Israel. Another potential Iranian ally has been neutered. And the same can be said of the Houthis. As the Wall Street Journal points out, the Houthis have never been entirely beholden to Iran in the first place. It's an ally, based mostly on its anti-West agenda and its calls for death to Israel and the US. But when push comes to shove, the Houthis will take a Houthi-first approach. That's according to Elizabeth Kendall of the University of Cambridge's Girton College, who tells the Journal, "I imagine it's been very shocking to the Houthis to see quite how Iran is deeply penetrated by intelligence. They'll probably be thinking that we should lie fairly low at the moment. We start maneuvering around, we give ourselves away, we reveal our locations." We also can't ignore the fact that the Houthis spent much of the earlier part of 2025 being hit hard by the US strikes which began in March, which have battered its leadership and destroyed some of its military facilities. While the group retains robust capabilities, some of its weapons, including those that allowed it to conduct cross-border and precision attacks, were taken out. Bloomberg notes. This capabilities issue combines with the question of incentive, Bloomberg also points out. The Houthis, though often labeled an Iranian proxy, are far more interested in gaining power in Yemen than they are in fighting a direct war against Israel and the US. They've already received a taste of what the US brings to the table. Maybe now, the Houthis believe that focusing on building their power base in Yemen is preferable to doing anything that could encourage Iran's enemies to focus on them. As for the Shiite or Shia militants in Iraq, we can boil their lack of involvement down to two issues. They're operating in a country that's still home to some 2,500 US military personnel, and they've seen what's happened to Hezbollah, and they don't want the same fate. The Shiite groups have launched isolated attacks against US personnel in the past, Bloomberg points out, but those attacks weren't full-blown declarations of war. It's also telling that Iran hasn't targeted US personnel in Iraq following America's strikes against its nuclear facilities. Instead, Iran struck or attempted to strike a US military base in Qatar. There will be echoes of the Hezbollah issue here for the Shiite groups. They saw Hezbollah fight for Iran and get nearly destroyed in response, with no help coming from Iran. Will the same thing happen to them if they start fighting against US personnel in Iraq? It could, and that's enough for them to stay out of the conflict, at least for now. What Iran now faces is isolation. Its larger allies, namely Russia and China, are relishing the opportunity to grow their influence and serve themselves as Iran crumbles under the weight of US and Israeli strikes. As for the proxy network, Iran overplayed its hand with them. By having them fight its war against Israel for the last couple of years, Iran has led all of its proxies closer to destruction without getting directly involved itself. Now that Iran is in a direct fight, its proxies have turned their collective backs. They're too hurt, too wary of Iran and its ability to support them. Iran is alone. And alone, its regime may soon fall. Worse yet for Iran, it may have just made the worst decision it could make. By targeting a US military base in Qatar, it has opened itself up to US annihilation. Find out how in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show if you want more videos covering the latest developments in the Middle East crisis.